Hello, hello. Hi, everybody. Kim here. Remember yesterday where we left off reading about the excommunication of Charles William Kingston? Charles William had just, he hadn't just met Charles Eating, but he did meet Charles Eating, and Charles Eating introduced him to people who rejected the 1890 manifesto ending plural marriage and went on the underground as a means of practicing their religion. These fundamentalists drew their authority from an 1886 revelation given to John Taylor, who at that time was president of the LDS Church. It was witnessed by Lawrence C. Woolley and John W. Woolley, saying that plural marriage should continue to be practiced regardless of opposition from state or federal government. Taylor set 5 individuals apart to see that no year passed without children being born into polygamous marriages. So, he stated that we're going to continue to practice polygamy. Polygamy should still be practiced. And we're sending 5 men out to ensure that there's at least 1 child born every year due to polygamous marriage. So, one of these budding fundamentalists was Charles William's own brother-in-law, Charles Henry Owen. A lot of Charles back then. Who had married Charles William's sister, Bessie Kingston. Charles Owen and Bessie became acquainted with Charles Eating near the same time Charles William began traveling to Salt Lake. From some suspiciously addressed letters, Owen inferred that Eating was either leading a double life or had involvement in plural marriage. Eating introduced Owen to an inventor named Roy Wilson, who spoke of meetings being held where certain individuals preached that the principle of plural marriage should still be lived. After attending the meetings with Bessie, Charles Owen told her, "If I ever live the principle, you'll be the one to say we should live it, and you will name the girl." So he's giving his wife some authority there. He's saying, okay, you're the one that has to say, yeah, we're going to live this, and yeah, you're going to marry her. Which is actually quite... I have to give him props for that. Not that he's living plural marriage, but that he's giving his wife the authority to say who he was going to marry. Excuse me, just one quick moment. What? You don't get to vacuum. Sorry, Gus is in here with me, and he decided he was going to do some vacuuming and was upset that he couldn't move the vacuum. So that time came in the spring of 1927 when Charles Owen and Bessie moved to Salt Lake across the street from a girl about 17 years old named Earlene Hull. That's Hull. Who developed a friendship with their daughter, Maureen. Earlene's parents alluded to their favor of the principle when they hinted that Earlene preferred the company of older men. Charles Owen was worried about her young age, but Bessie told him that after praying about it, she was sure we should live the law. And Earlene was the girl. The marriage took place on January 29, 1928. The ceremony being performed by an elderly John W. Woolley. Charles William recounts that soon after this polygamous marriage, Bessie was put on the blacklist in the Salt Lake Temple, leading Bessie's parents and siblings to shun her. But Charles William was curious and questioned his sister about her decision. She said that a patriarch of the church by the name of Homer M. Brown gave her a blessing in which he told her that the Lord was pleased with what she had done. And when she told him about John W. Woolley, whom Charles William went to visit, bringing his wife Vesta along with him. I know the wording of some of these sound kind of off, but this was back in the early 1900s, and this was by, supposedly Charles William's own records and diaries, or journals. Sorry, men didn't keep diaries, they kept journals. During the visit, Charles William noticed Woolley's patriarchal blessing hanging on the wall. At the end of the blessing were the words, "And thou shalt hold the keys." When Charles William questioned Woolley about the phrase, Woolley replied that church patriarch John Smith, who was related to Joseph, had confirmed the keys to the sealing ordinances on him in hopes of him passing them on to one of Smith's progeny. To qualify for this authority, Woolley explained, the individual would have to live the patriarchal law of marriage, which at that point we know patriarchal law of marriage meant polygamy. Later, during a temple trip, Charles William knelt in prayer before the Lord in his hotel room and told him that I always wanted to be one of his humble servants and that I was ready and anxious to do his bidding, whatever that might be. From that time on, I tried to keep my mind alert and heart ready for any and all instructions I fully expected to receive from the Lord. During another temple trip, Charles William received an impression he described as plain and clear. You will meet a young woman this trip, and you will receive her name and address. She will help you in the thing the Lord has for you to do. And indeed, while attending a temple session, he met a woman who handed him a card with her name and address. While sleeping on the train home to Pocatello, he suddenly woke, reached into his pocket, and pulled out the woman's card. He seemed to hear someone say, "She is the one." Charles William met with her several times, discovering that she was from a large polygamous family and that she wanted to live the principle too. He began to feel she was fishing for a proposal. I admired very much in her temple attire, Charles William writes, but she seemed obnoxious to me when in her street dress. Besides, I did not have any idea of marrying the girl since I had not received any such direction. After realizing he was not going to respond to her hints, the woman became angry and stopped meeting with him. So Charles William wrote her. Now this is all in smaller script, so it's not saying this is what he wrote her. He's just relaying about him writing this letter. A letter which I well knew would go straight to the heads of the church as evidence they would use to bring action against me for my standing. So it was with a feeling of fear and dread that I carefully composed the letter. I held it 3 days after writing it, being afraid to send it to the post office, suspecting well the after effects. And give me just a moment here, please. I need some more water. You can't have any of my water, though I know you want some. He gives no details about the letter's content, but he assumes that the woman passed it to the temple president, George F. Richards, whose wife she was friends with, and then he on to higher authorities. I soon found out that she was to play the important role of getting me cut off from the church. a very essential event in my career with the gospel. The following month, Charles William and Vesta went to Salt Lake to attend the temple together. After seeing his recommend, an assistant recorder asked Charles William to meet with the temple president. According to Charles William's account, President Richards asked if he believed in plural marriage, to which Charles William replied, "Yes, I do. I believe in it with all my heart." When President Richards asked if he understood the church's policy against plural marriage, Charles Williams told Richards that he believed the policy came from the devil. President Richards admonished Charles Williams to renounce the principle of plural marriage and to discount his association with its adherents. By the end of the interview, Charles William had missed the beginning of the temple session, so he used this time to approach some friends for advice. The first, was his recent polygamous brother-in-law, Charles Henry Owen, who advised him to agree to the temple president's promise but not to keep his word, referring to Joseph F. Smith, who had advised people to make certain denials to the enemies of the truth. By doing so, you can save yourself and keep your family and friends, he concluded. But Charles William refused to break his promise. Charles Zitting didn't have any advice for him, but to set up an appointment for him to meet J. Leslie Broadbent in the Hotel Utah, who advised him to simply not return to the temple. Vesta's reaction to Charles William after finishing his temple session suggests that someone had spoken with her about his situation. She laughs out. "Now, what have you been up to? Chasing women, I suppose," she continued. "I'm going back to Idaho Falls on the next train, and I'm going to leave you. The children are all on my side. Your father and mother and all of your brothers and sisters will hate you. The church people will be against you, and the law will be looking for you. All of these things, and what are you doing to us? And all you would have to do is make one little promise, and you won't even do that. That proves how much you think of us." That night, Charles William left alone to wander the streets of Salt Lake. It seemed the world had dropped out from under his feet, because I knew my wife well enough to know she would never make false threats as a woman. That meant what she said. Charles saw this event as a fulfillment of his dream. He was hanging by his fingertips, about to fall to his death. Charles William returned to Idaho Falls the following day and talked with his wife. But according to his narrative, Vesta was still furious. "All you have to do is make a promise. It won't cost you a cent. It's just that easy. And yet you are too stubborn to even do that, and you expect me to give up all of my people and my church and my friends just to go along with your stubbornness? Well, I'm not going to do any such thing." Later she continued, "Why do you hold out when it would be so easy? Can't you see that what you're going to do to yourself and to us? Can't you see what a light you're putting us in? Oh, and why can't you understand?" But Charles William replied, "I promised the Lord that if he understood, he would show me the truth. I would embrace it, whatever the cost. I have placed you and the children and every other single thing that I have on the altar, and asked the Lord to accept my offering. Now, if you are determined to go, as bad as it hurts me, There is absolutely nothing I can do about it. I will take my medicine and let you go." In time, the temple recorder contacted Charles Williams' parents, who wrote a letter to him concerning his standing with the church. They referred to his dream, specifically the moment he had slipped and was hanging off the path by his fingertips. They decided that if I left the church, that would prove that I had fallen to destruction, and if I remained with the church, I would be safe. However, he disagreed with the interpretation. Soon, they paid him a visit in Idaho Falls. "My mother talked to me all night until I had to get ready for work the next day," Charles Williams writes. "When I returned from work that afternoon, she started again and kept it until 11 o'clock that night. It appears that at this stage, my parents were not necessarily opposed to the principle of polygamy, but rather to their son's opposition to church leadership. Charles Williams' father had been sealed to one of his previous girlfriends who had died before marrying his wife, standing as proxy. Charles William writes that he responded, 'As much as I would like to please you, I cannot go back on what the Lord has shown me to be the truth.' Charles William was next approached by his 19-year-old son, Charles Eldon Kingston, who just goes by Eldon, whom he met with twice a week to discuss religion. His son said, 'Father, I heard you were going to be cut off from the church.' When Charles William confirmed this rumor, Eldon said, 'Well, that's terrible. I would be better for a person to lose his life than be cut off from the church.' Charles William agreed, but for one exception: turning your back on and denying what one knows to be the truth. He then told his son about some of the things he had recently learned about the 1890 Manifesto and other church historical events. Shortly after, Eldon had a dream, and Charles William recounted. He dreamed an angel of the Lord came to him. He was on the sea coast looking out on the harbor. A ship was ready to sail, and the angel said, 'Listen, son, your mother is on that ship. She will have one chance to get off. If she fails to get off, she will be destroyed because the ship is going down and everyone on it will be drowned.' Eldon wrote a letter to his mother immediately and soon met with her to discuss the dream. She said the dream meant she was on the ship because she was standing with me. Charles William writes, 'If she left me, she would be getting off that ship.' However, he felt that the ship represented the church as well as every other situation people find themselves in who fail to find and embrace and hold on to the truth. February 10th, 1929. Charles William was summoned to appear before the council and the body of the Quorum of the 70. At the meeting, Brigham H. Roberts, who was sent to Idaho Falls to preside over the meeting, charged him with believing and teaching that the manifesto was a man-made document and that the Lord didn't have anything to do with it. Charles William openly acknowledged the charge and then asked to speak with Roberts alone. Charles William had been publishing pamphlets and the revelations received by John Taylor and Wilford Woodruff, sanctioning plural marriage. At that time, I had not published 3 editions of these revelations. After arranging them with numbered verses with headings and explanations of their contents, he would place copies of these pamphlets, along with others, on the church literature tables that were outside the temple grounds at the conference. He distributed 1,000 copies that way. Excuse me. He questioned Roberts about the revelations he had been publishing, and Roberts confirmed their authenticity, but concluded that his action of publishing them was simply unwise. When the motion was called for, the vote to release Charles from the 146th quorum of the 70 was unanimous. Charles William was next scheduled for a High Council trial, but before that happened, he records, he was visited by his state president, Fred A. Kane, who tried unsuccessfully to dissuade him from his position. Soon thereafter, Kane became ill enough to be admitted to the Mayo Brothers Hospital and could not attend Charles William's trials. He died a few months later. At the beginning of the trial, Charles William was given a chance to speak. He took 2 hours, giving them the history of the manifesto, the laws of the land passed against the Latter-day Saints, the 4 revelations, the history of their coming forth, the meeting of 1886 as told in the pamphlets of Underground Days, and the appointment of the men to keep the principle alive. It seemed the council was willing to give Charles William the benefit of a doubt. One member had known him for his highly successful missionary days, and others had been his neighbors for years. One on the High Council went so far as to ask, "Do you think, Brother Kingston, that the knock on the head you received when you had that accident on the railroad had anything to do with what's happening to you?" Charles William replied, "Well, if I did, brethren, it would be a blessing, for every one of you could get a knock on the head." The council offered to give him 6 months to consider his stance, but he did not seek any special privilege, but I wanted to stand on record so that all men might know that I stood out for the principle of righteousness and truth. Finally, the High Council unanimously voted to excommunicate him. So, there's a little bit more here, but I want to move on to some other things that have to do with his excommunication, starting with his meeting with the assistant recorder at the temple. And we will continue that tomorrow. Okay? Bye, everyone. Have a great day. Have a great Friday. That's what I like to call it. And we will continue reading about Charles William, who is the father of Eldon Kingston and the father of Ortel. But we'll follow up on this. So go ahead, if you enjoyed this content, like, share, subscribe. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. I'm not saying what Charles was doing was necessarily correct, but I am, I'm just sharing with you more of the history of the Kingston clan. Okay? We'll talk to you later. Bye.